after hours, I would work on my main project, which at the time wasn't, it was my side hustle, but I knew eventually it would turn into my main hustle. The other job was just trading time for dollars, keeping everything afloat, doing okay. I wasn't complaining about it, but I knew that eventually, if I did it right, that this side hustle would be very successful, far better than any 9-to-5 job I could have.
Hi, I'm James Taylor, business creativity and innovation keynote speaker, and this is The Creative Life, a show dedicated to you, the creative. If you're looking for motivation, inspiration, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's an author, musician, entrepreneur, performer, designer, or thought leader. They'll share with you their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, and much, much more. You'll find show notes for this episode, as well as free training on creativity, over at jamestaylor.me. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor here, and I'm delighted today to have on the show Troy Underwood. Over 433,000 ambitious entrepreneurs start up new businesses each year in the United States, yet nearly just as many, roughly 400,000 annually, go belly up and close shop. And only 1/3 are still in existence when 10 years rolls around. In his latest book, How to Launch Your Side Hustle, Silicon Valley software developer turned serial entrepreneur Troy Underwood shows us that entrepreneurship and business ownership are distinctively different professions. And it's my great pleasure to have Troy with us today. Welcome, Troy.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So share with us all what's happening in your world at the moment.
Well, in my world at the moment, other than the isolation from coronavirus, I'm keeping on doing side hustle work. I've got a few side hustles that I'm doing right now that I eventually might turn into other hustles. I'm doing wellness retreats, and I am actually going to be putting out some webinars and some information, techniques and consulting perhaps on side hustle. So launching off the book, How to Launch Your Side Hustle. My daughter and I are currently working on monetizing that, if you will, so we can help people run their own side hustle.
So when you think about starting, just describe a little bit more what your perspective of a side hustle is, because I hear different things. Some people say it's about something that just creates a passive income. Other people, it's something that that they continue to work on, maybe to leave a 9-to-5 job. What's your definition of a side hustle?
Well, a side hustle typically is what you just described, a side job. But if you launch it, and it gets into semantics, if you launch it and you want to eventually run that as your job, as your hustle, your main hustle. So basically, it could be how to turn your side hustle into your main hustle or your solo hustle, which is basically what I did. I was a software developer, and I would do software. I would work either at a job or a consulting contract projects. And then after hours, I would work on my main project, which at the time wasn't, it was my side hustle, but I knew eventually it would turn into my main hustle. The other job was just trading time for dollars, keeping everything afloat, doing okay. I wasn't complaining about it, but I knew that eventually, if I did it right, that this side hustle would be very successful, far better than any 9-to-5 job I could have.
So how do you know if, like, let's say you've got 4 different ideas for 4 different side hustles, how do you know which ones you should be pursuing and actually starting to develop?
Well, part of it is write something out. And when I say write something down, it doesn't have to be a formal business plan, but just write a few notes down. Use the whiteboard if you have to. Just jot some notes down on each of them. Start thinking them through, and then see if you can have a friend, family, or better yet, maybe somebody you don't like because they're just too brutally honest, to talk to you about them. And part of it isn't the end result of what you're going to get from the conversation, but the whole process. So it forces you to really think, and you need to think because entrepreneurs are usually very optimistic. They have ideas, they're creative, they think everything's going to work. And like you just pointed out with those numbers, uh, data actually suggests otherwise. Restaurants close. I mean, most small business entrepreneurial endeavors do not succeed. So if you have a number of them, the hardest thing to do really is to narrow it down and focus. Just do one, or maybe two, but I'm going to focus on one. Do one and do it well. So talk to somebody as if they were an investor. And you have to convince them, even if you're convincing yourself, but it's hard to convince yourself when you're so optimistic. Maybe it's a spouse. It really helps to have the spouse engaged in your endeavor. If you can get a mentor, somebody to sit down and get an accountant. They're rational people. Sit down and go over that with you.
They're going to go straight through that business plan that you have there and say, okay, here are all the weak points for you.
Exactly. And if you don't have somebody do that with you, do that for you, you're going to go into it partially blind. And I'm not suggesting that you have to have every I dotted and every T crossed before you start. But you need to do a little bit of thinking, a little bit of research. And then at some point, you don't want paralysis by analysis. You want to actually jump into it, decide and go.
So you mentioned they're talking about investors. What are, in terms of the research you did in the book and the types of work that you've done in the past, what do you find are maybe smarter or more creative ways to fund your startup? We often think, okay, we have this idea, perhaps go to a bank, get a loan for it as well. But obviously there's different ways of thinking about it. So what advice would you generally give?
Well, and that's very important, especially for as I call it, a necessity entrepreneur. Financing is critical. You can't just expect to go to Sand Hill, venture capital companies in Silicon Valley, and get someone to pump $50 million into your company just because you think it's a good idea. It's just not going to happen. So creative ways to start the company. And even in the book, you can get the 1% that can do that. They can go to a VC and they can get $50 million, either based on their reputation or a really solid business plan. The other 99% are going to have to come up with a creative way to finance it. I financed it a little bit with, I had another job and I had computer consulting that I could do. I could just go out there, charge by the hour, and then I would use that to keep afloat while I was building my other enterprise. You can also use credit cards, although I'd really discourage that. You have to be very careful when and how you use a credit card. You can use a second on your house. What I did, I used mostly real estate. You look back on it, and in this I say I looked back on it because I do this in hindsight. As a necessity entrepreneur, I didn't have this all planned out. It's like, okay, in March I'm going to do this, and then in June I'm going to do this. It kind of worked out to say, okay, what do I need to do now? This client, I thought I'd get 10 clients. I only got 3. What am I going to do now? So the business plan has to be very dynamic. But at some point, most people really do not follow their original business plan. And if you're so anal that you have to follow your original business plan, the odds of succeeding are going to go down even further. Odds of succeeding are very slim anyway, but if you are so stuck on following your plan to the letter, it'll go down even further. So you have to be like, Barry Sanders when he's a running back. And if you see a big defensive lineman in your way, even though the coach drafted the plan to say you go this way, don't. Turn left, turn right, turn around, run in circles, avoid him. You've got to work with what you have at the time, and times change. Real estate worked for me because you get lower interest rates, yada, yada. I figured out how I could buy a few properties. You can buy real estate, nothing down, over the phone. So I did that, and then I used that money to fund my business. So I thought my business would be, and it turned out I was right here, I thought my business would be a better investment and a better venture in the long run than real estate. Real estate's very safe, very solid, has pluses, and it's creative ways to finance it. Creativity really matters here.
But you're also talking there about what you just said there about taking resources and moving it from almost like one asset class into another. That's sure. Almost like a classic of an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur, their job is to take an asset, that's cash, and move it to the place where they're going to get the best return. And you say, okay, I'm going to get a couple of points here if I just have it in property, but if I put it into this side hustle, which is getting some traction, I'm going to get perhaps a much better return from that.
Absolutely. But work in that too, and not just run your scenarios based on returns, and money. Base it on utility. And utility from an economist's perspective is your overall well-being. So if you can make more money at something you hate, don't do it. Do something you love, even if you might make slightly or a lot less money. You're going to be much happier in the long run, regardless of you end up rich. Who wants to be the richest man in the cemetery? Nobody. And never sacrifice your family or your health just to gain extra money.
And the types of businesses that you've seen from looking at other types of kind of side hustle businesses that really lend themselves very well to being a side hustle? Are there ones that you find that are easiest to get off the ground, up and running off the ground? Are there ones that you tend to see that last longer than others?
Well, the ones that are easiest to get up and running off the ground, if you can be the labor. So you found out an interesting way to come up with the capital. Maybe you go to friends, fools, and family. Maybe you get a second on your house. We talked about that. But then if you can also be the labor, classical definition of some people define an entrepreneur as the intermediary between labor and capital. But for the necessity entrepreneur, you have to be the labor, or at least it helps if you are, and the capital. So you have to get the capital yourself. Maybe it's the couch cushions. But if you're the labor, so let's say you want to start a furniture manufacturer or something, and you're really good with a hammer, well, you're going to start out being your own labor. I was a software developer. So I could write software. I could go into any company and say, I'm going to automate your business process. What do you need done? And I could just do it. I didn't have to hire other people. Hiring other people, step 2, is a very big step. It's very difficult. That changes. But if you want to run a company, that's what you have to do. So it's best, if you want to look at something that's really easy to get into, is something that you can do, as opposed to other people. They'll go out there and they'll say, okay, I need $100 million and I'm going to hire 1,000 people, and this is the business model. We're not going to do that. We're just going to start out saying, hey, I'm a software developer. I can start out, I'm going to sell my services to fund this thing, and then I'm going to start writing custom software because I like app development for games or whatever it might be, and just start doing it. And you can grow slow that way.
And even as that entrepreneur that's just starting, it was just you on your own. What perhaps low cost techniques and more kind of creative ideas have you found in terms of doing that initial marketing and selling, just even before the business starts to build momentum, just to kind of get out the gate, start getting those first sales, getting that kind of validation?
To get going on that, you have your product, you have your idea, you've kind of started on that. Now you need to start either perfecting it a little bit and selling it, marketing it, doing something. The necessity entrepreneur is going to go out there and they're going to have to do a lot of this marketing themselves. They're not going to have the funds to go hire a publicist. They're not going to have the funds to go put full page ads in a magazine or newspaper or something. Do people still do that?
I don't know. I'm sure someone somewhere still does it.
But find a way. I found a lot of creative ways. Magazines. I would, instead of advertising in the magazine, I would write an article for the magazine. And they would either publish it with my name as the author, or better yet, contact a magazine or newspaper and be interviewed and have them put their name. So do press releases, that type of thing. Write articles for magazines. Speak. Go out there and speak in public to different groups that might have some interest in the product or service that you're offering. And they're going to know that you're there to promote your product or service, but don't make your presentation, don't make your speech a sales pitch. It just gets really old and boring. Educate them, and they will also ask about your product or service. I used to do CE, continuing education presentations in the insurance industry. And if somebody asked about my product, I would say that's not appropriate to talk about that during the continuing education because the Department of Insurance frowns on that. But after the show, I will be happy to talk to you all day long. And then you'd spend your time talking to a handful of people that are interested in your product or service. And
So,
don't be afraid to promote yourself.
so really
But you
kind of
have to do it smartly.
putting the education, the teaching part first, and educating,
Yes.
inspiring your potential market, and then making that transition to the sale and to what you're doing. What about you? So taking that next step, so you're starting to get a little bit of traction, your marketing, your selling starting to working, and you have to now go and hire that very first employee. Any kind of words of wisdom in terms of just kind of getting that first person, like starting off well, starting on your strong foot?
First, make sure that at this point you actually need that person, that you have a little bit more work than you can do, and it's actually generating some money. Now, you might have to go out there and go in debt, but see if you can, if possible, wait a little bit so that you're not just going out there because you happen to work a 5-hour day instead of a 4-hour day. This is a cumbersome, labor-intensive endeavor that someone's going to take on to go out there and start a business like this. So keep your expenditures. If you're in a service business, your number one expense is going to be labor. So, put it off for a little while, but not too long. It's kind of this whole thing is a balancing act. You want to be arrogant, but not too arrogant. You want to be frugal, but not too frugal. I told a lawyer acquaintance of mine that the best thing he could do for his law practice is to hire the best legal professional assistant office manager he could find and pay that person more than he thinks he can afford. He was going through a different office manager every 9 to 14 months. And you're never going to grow your company if you keep doing that. Now, he wasn't trying to grow it into a large company like I did, but if you're running even a small professional services, make sure that if you have somebody that is critical, pay them well, because you want them to stick around. Labor turnover is incredibly expensive. It's really a drag on the company.
And then that's obviously like that lawyer, for example, is giving him or her leverage in order to do what they're better at doing as well. But I guess you're saying that if they don't hire in the right way, then if you're having to retrain somewhere every 9 to 14 months, that's a lot of time in just, finding the person, hiring the person, training the person. Maybe the first couple of months, you're not really going to be getting the highest kind of productivity from. So there's a big cost there.
Exactly.
So what about, okay, so we have, we're rocking and rolling. We've got maybe a couple of employees now. Our kind of side hustle has actually turned into much more than that as well. How do we then start to go exponential? How do we really start to ramp things up?
Well, you have to see that your operation itself, whatever it might be, is scalable. Now, I'm only going to enter an operation that is scalable. So whether it's one of my ventures has to do with plant-based grab-and-go snack foods. Can that be scaled? And the answer is yes. You can add more kitchens, you can add more of whatever it takes, and you can run it from small to big. If however, what you're doing is not scalable and you don't get any economies when you grow it, it's a different story. It can still be done. There's a lot of different margins and different accounting metrics that grocery stores are very different than service industries, but they can still both make money. So make sure that you look at your business. It is scalable. If it is scalable, then start up with a few core people that you think are really great. They fit your mindset, your culture. At this point, you only have a few employees, so it's really hard to say you have a total company culture, but you do. You've already started to establish that culture. On culture, I would look at a company, and if I can look at a percentage, let's say 10% of their workforce, and they're all jerks, I can guarantee you the CEO is a jerk. If I talk to a percentage of their staff and they're all great, I guarantee you the CEO is great. If you just, great CEOs hire great people, jerky CEOs hire jerky people. It just follows through the culture. Now, it's not 100%, but there is a typical pattern there. And I always just tell my employees that when you're out at a trade show, you're out at public, you're out meeting with prospects and clients, you represent me, you represent the company, you represent your coworkers. Behave appropriately. So don't just think that you can go just because you're not on company property and be a jerk.
Yeah.
So it's really difficult once you start to scale it. And then you go from 2 employees to 22 to 102. And then you have all another problem set that you never envisioned, whether it's legal or whether it's human resources, et cetera, et cetera. But those will grow. You'll grow with them. And usually you look at it saying, oh, I should have done that last week. So study, talk to people who have already done it, like you're doing right now. Hey, how did you go from 2 employees to 200 employees? And what was that path? Now that's a big leap right there. You might go from 2 to 10 and 10 to 50 and on and on. Then what do you do when you have 1,000 employees? And it's a very different world.
You can have kind of higher quality problems. At that point, you have a different set of problems, a different style of problems, I guess, at that stage.
Absolutely. We want some of these problems. Yeah.
So I was having a conversation actually because of all what we'll be going through in around the world just now with COVID-19 coronavirus. And I was having a conversation 2 nights ago with a friend of mine who runs a very successful business, and they've all been I'm trying what the term is when you kind of you close the office, but everyone furloughed. That's the word I'm looking for. Everyone's basically all this staff, everyone's been furloughed for the past 2 weeks. And he was saying what's been quite interesting for him. He's had the business now for 20 years, and what's been quite interesting is that having that time at home. He said, "This is the longest period I've ever had at home when I'm not really able to think about the business." He said, "Actually, I'm probably now in a position where I'm thinking about selling the business." So it's a very successful, very profitable business, but this allowed him to take a little bit of a step back. And he said, James, whenever we get back into the business, then probably I'm going to leave it about a year, get another set of accounts for the next annual year, and I'm going to exit this business. So when it comes to exiting, your business, are there any kind of, because you've been involved in a number of different businesses where you've started and you've exited things, what rules would you be giving for that person, that friend?
Well, decide a couple of things on exiting. One, think about the exit when you enter. And if you haven't decided, that's fine. You can still enter and decide it later. Are you going to turn this over to your kids or grandkids someday? Are you just going to close the shop and walk away? Or are you going to try to sell it? And then if you sell it, some other company is going to buy it. Is it a strategic investor? Is it a capital investor? And the investor that you go after, the acquirer that you try to talk into buying your company, you have a slightly different pitch if it's based on their strategy. Is it a competitor that wants to buy you? The other sad thing is just sometimes a competitor will want to buy you just to shut you down. They'll buy you and just kind of take a couple things that they might need and shut the rest down, and you're no longer a thorn in their side. That may irritate you. Now, if your goal on that is, well, I don't care, they paid me, so what do I care? But other people like to see, one of my companies sold again and again, and I exited, so I had nothing to do with this, but it sold for over $4 billion. And I kind of looked at that and said, wow, that's kind of cool. Now, mine wasn't the only portion of that company. It did grow significantly since I sold it. But it is nice to look at that and say that process that I developed changed the entire industry. It not only changed the industry, it created a whole new industry around it, which is kind of nice. But there might not be a financial motivation in having that sort of euphoric feeling to say, wow, look what I accomplished. People don't really go into it saying, I want to be known for having accomplished something. They usually go into it saying, I need to pay the bills. I'd like to grow something that I can sell. So when they're exiting, decide, is it a complete exit? Is it a partial exit? Usually an acquirer does not come in and just pay you 100% cash. You want to sell the company for $10 million or $100 million. They don't walk in and say, great, here's $100 million. I'll talk to you never. They don't do that. You usually have some sort of holdback. There might be an earn-out agreement, something tied to some performance. There might be an employment agreement. You have to decide if you want to stay on for any sort of transition period. And are you done? Look at your age. And, if you're older, if you're 65, 70, 80, and you're done with this, you may not want to stick around more than a year in transition, or even 3 months in transition. That boat might be calling you. On the other side, if you're really young, you might want to just stay with the company. So do a partial exit. When I did my first one, I stayed with the company, and I ended up working with a venture capital, but then I was the single largest individual shareholder. Then you have professional money, and there's a whole conversation about professional money. But really the exit is that business owner, that entrepreneur has to decide, what do they want to get out of the exit? It's usually going to be someone's going to come in, buy it, transition, and sell it later, but you'll be out of the picture by then. So distance yourself from the company emotionally after you've sold it.
And as you've gone along your journey of starting companies, selling businesses, has there been a key light bulb moment, a key insight in your life and your journey as an entrepreneur? A time when you went, okay, you made a very important distinction about perhaps the type of businesses you wanted to build, or what you wanted to create in the world?
Well, we talked about the scalable. I mean, that was when you go into it, you say, oh, it's got to be scalable because the sky's the limit, that type of thing. But it also had to be something that the entrepreneur has some aptitude at, has some interest in. I'm going to say passion, thirdly, there, because if somebody just goes into a business and says, oh, I'm passionate about it, I'll tell you what, every time I hear that, I cringe. I know it sounds the opposite of, oh, do what you're passionate about. That usually means you're going to be irrational, illogical, stupid, and you'll have a really bad business plan because you're passionate about it. Even passionate people have to apply some business sense to what it is they're doing. So be careful about going into something just because you're passionate about it. My advice is don't stress too much. And that's another balance thing. If you don't stress enough and you just go, oh, you know what, the universe will take care of itself, you're likely to go bankrupt. However, if you stress too much, you're just likely to have a heart attack and die. So you got to have some balance between the two. And what I've noticed, matter of fact, I told my last CFO, I said, you can talk to me, here's our rules. You can talk to me about anything, and don't stress over anything. Do not ever walk into my office, Chicken Little, the sky is falling, because it's not. And that was even back in the days when I had to juggle money. It's like, okay, which credit card are we going to take a cash advance from so we can make payroll? Don't stress over it. It's just money. It's just a job. And when people hear that, no, it's not, it's my livelihood. It's not, well, yeah, it is. But if you stress over it too much, it's not going to be any fun. And you do have to have a little bit of fun along the way.
Absolutely. And it's almost, you almost reminds me when you talk about that idea of balance, the difference between in stress, distress, and eustress. There is a good type of stress that you can kind of go into things if you can hold that in that balance, as you were saying.
Yes, absolutely.
In terms of your own work, do you have an online resource or a tool or an app like an Evernote, for example, that you find very useful in doing the creative work you do?
I have a number of them that I've used, different apps. I'm very interesting that I don't necessarily go, oh, I have to have this app to do something. As a matter of fact, I wrote the book, How to Launch Your Side Hustle, which I will say is the most interesting book of the 21st century. Without a doubt, the most interesting book of the 21st century, because when I wrote it, there's a lot of fancy apps, Grammarly, and there's just things that help your writing. I was sitting next to a passenger on an airplane, and the passenger said, that's an interesting story, Troy. You should write a book. So I immediately picked up my iPhone and started writing. And I wrote the whole book with my thumb or thumbs. Because on occasion, I would pick up my iPad and use two thumbs. So it's almost like, no, I'm not going to let the constraints or the opportunity of an app or a tool direct me. Do what you have, make it happen, use whatever you have. If all you have is a pen and paper, start writing with a pen and paper. But don't use an excuse. I'm kind of a no excuses kind of guy. If you don't have the right tool, make it, build it, find it, do it with another tool, figure it out. You know, my kids would always ask me a question and I'd hold up 3 fingers. Oh, yeah, figure it out. I could tell them the answer, but they don't learn anything that way. Their homework's done faster, but they didn't learn it. So figure it out, use whatever tool you have. And because I always had my iPhone, I wrote most of the book either in bed, on a plane, at the beach, in the park. I didn't use any tools like fancy tools for text conversion, voice conversion, anything like that. My daughter edited it. She did a fantastic job, but she pointed out a lot of typos and punctuation errors, which is fine.
I think you can be excused for. I think you can be
excused
excused for that by having written a book on an iPhone. I think you can be excused for the first draft having some typos in it. Actually, so while just kind of talking about books, apart from your own book, what other book would you recommend to our listeners that they check out? It could be on this idea of a startup, or maybe it's just a book you've gifted more often than others. And also, what would be an album, a record that you suggest our listeners check out?
Okay, so I will tell a few things. Books that I read at a young age that kind of influenced me. And you don't really think about it at the time. You just read them. I remember reading Horatio Alger, books like Mark the Match Boy, Ragged Dick. He's like a young men's rag to riches kind of social philosopher. You can do it. And I just grew up believing that. My dad was self-employed. You want to go out and make a company? Go out and make a company. Other people that maybe grew up differently wouldn't agree with that. They'd go, no, you have to work for the company and then retire with the company. But another one, Richest Man in Babylon, was a timeless tale for anybody that's wants to learn how to use money and make money and keep money and invest money. More current, I remember reading Richard Branson, How to Losing My Virginity. That was a very interesting read. So I've read a lot of those books, typically a little bit on the high-tech side, Michael Dell, Bill Gates, those types of things. And I don't necessarily say to take everything they say at face value. Don't go into it and say, I'm going to do everything Richard Branson does or Bill Gates does. Don't do that. Go into it, take some ideas, learn what he did right, learn what he did wrong. That's why Richard Branson's book was great, because he told you every mistake he made. You're like, oh my gosh, your mother's going to read this book. I went into a lot of mistakes, and I want to tell people what they're going to experience, especially if they're successful. It's like winning the lottery. Now, for some people, it will change your life. It'll change the life of the friends and family around you, your employees, and it's not always for the better. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. Album, I still contend the greatest album. Matter of fact, greatest album ever made is the first album I ever bought with my own money. So I launched my little side hustle at the time, saved up some money, and bought Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Elton John.
Yes. Great album. And I want you to imagine, Troy, you wake up tomorrow morning and you have to start from scratch. So you've got all the tools, all the knowledge that you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you and you know no one. What would you do? How would you restart things?
Well, to a certain extent, I'm actually kind of doing that right now, because I've changed industries. After I sold my last company and effectively retired, that got boring after a week. And then I said, you know what, I'm going to go out there and solve the number one problem in the world. Well, first, before you're going to solve the number one problem in the world, you have to identify the number one problem in the world, or the number one problem in America. So I started studying, and I thought, and as an undergraduate, I loved economics. I went from pre-med, and on a dare, I took an econ course, loved it, and switched my whole major. I mean, I'm 5 units away from a bachelor's in chemistry, studying computer science and mathematics, doing my pre-med work. And overnight, I changed all of that. No more physical science. It's all now social science. It's all economics. And I did, I took the next year and finished a degree in economics and loved it. So I thought I'd go back and get my PhD in economics. And as I started studying, I said, what would you write your thesis on? Well, the number one problem in the world, which after studying and studying and reading and studying, I came out with 2 words: Bad diet. Bad diet is the number one problem in the world. And so much stems from that. Now, at the time, I was an insurance professional. I wrote software in the insurance industry, handled everything from medical insurance, eligibility, enrollment, Obamacare, for the Affordable Care Act, for doing compliance reporting, et cetera, et cetera. So I followed that industry very, very closely. And I'm not even doing it necessarily from a health perspective. I'm doing it from a monetary perspective. Why are insurance premiums high? And insurance premiums are high because healthcare is expensive. And healthcare is expensive because we don't eat right. So I'm starting a whole new and very different, it's tangentially connected, but it's a very different perspective. I go into this world and no one knows me, so they don't care. So as I'm doing this new endeavor, the problem with it is I'm not doing it because I have to. I run a couple other companies as a necessity entrepreneur. I had to do it. If I don't do it, I don't eat. That type of thing. Yeah, I could have gotten a full-time job, but I didn't really want to. And another plus, sometimes you take life as it throws it at you. If you get fired from a job, that can be a blessing. That'll give you the opportunity to go start your own company. Or if you get furloughed, as we are, around the world right now, a lot of people are at home. Take this opportunity to read a few books and maybe plan your side hustle and then start it. I would use a lot of the same techniques. Now, I don't have to be a necessity entrepreneur because I went out on this wellness retreat and I spent millions buying and stocking and preparing for wellness retreats to teach people how to eat a whole food plant-based diet, how to enjoy exercising and hiking and just relaxing and stress reduction and mindfulness and socialization. Now, we're not really doing the socialization right now, but I think it's a very important part of a holistic wellness program. So as I approach companies now to talk about this idea, they don't know who I am. I'm not writing software, which was my skill and expertise. And now I have to gain a whole new reputation. And you do that kind of in the same way.
Yeah.
You go out there, you speak to different groups, but you have to have a business plan and idea formulated, which I'm in the process of formulating. I haven't been aggressive about it. Now, I said to someone last week, if I had no money, I would have already run this business and it would be successful right now. But I'm not in giant need. I don't have to do anything this week. I can do it next week, which makes me go a lot slower. It's really fascinating when people that have a lot of money just work in enormous hours and put effort into it. And I've just been more chill about it. But I have gone out there and worked with a bunch of companies to help their employee base focus more on wellness. Because if you're healthier, your insurance costs and your healthcare costs are lower, and you're more productive.
Absolutely. Well, Troy, thank you so much for coming on today, and I wish you all the best in this new endeavor, this new side hustle that's starting up. Where is the best place for people to go to learn more about you and get their copy of the book?
Well, TroyUnderwood.com has a little bit about me and the book, and then there's links to the books. You can go to Target.com, Amazon.com, eCampus.com. So there's a number of online sources to get the book. If anyone wants to email me, go on to TroyUnderwood.com and contact me, and I'll give you advice that's best I can, and keep a dialogue going.
Fantastic. Well, Troy, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing with us all about your creative life.
Thank you so much.
If you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.